So there is a real political argument, which is why meetings like this are actually really important, because we have to win hearts and minds, because you have to have society, just as society bought into the idea and the concept of a welfare state. So winning that political argument in terms of hearts and minds for the concept of a new version of funding and eliminating poverty within our society. Now, uh, there are there are other major problems, and that is winning people over at a time when so many people are integrated into the complexities of the benefit system as it exists at the moment. People's reluctance to want change. We've seen of the crisis of universal credit that started with quite reasonable intentions, but then because of austerity and for other reasons has turned into the exact opposite of what it was intended to be. So I think the fact that we have the possibility of a trial within Wales, within an area, I think is really a major step forward. But I think the dangers and the complexities that have to be resolved in it is what it's going to be a trial of, what it is actually going to deliver, what are the principles and what it's based, how much does it actually mean, and how does it integrate with those particular issues I've said. So I don't think but this is by any stretch easy, but the elimination of poverty has never been easy. So I think there's a lot of thought that still needs to go on. We have to ourselves, I think, within this campaign, face up to the difficulties rather than thinking this is going to be an easy ride, because there are major challenges to win. Because if the pilots that do start do not succeed, and they may not succeed if they're not based on the correct principles, then it will actually do a lot of damage to the whole concept of this idea. So I throw myself wholeheartedly into this. Look, I'm now a state pensioner. This isn't something that's going to directly have an impact on me in my lifetime. But we have whole generations of people coming through now, and it is time now to recalibrate and I think reboot our welfare system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. That was fantastic. Just to pick up on your point there about winning people over, I think over the last couple of months or so, we've been really frustrated with the coronavirus and not be able to get out in public and actually speak to people. I think that's one of the, especially within RCT, we'll have a lot of people who would benefit from a UBI within RCT in certain areas of the borough, most definitely. So we would like to be able to speak to people on the street and just make them aware of what it is, really, just to have that conversation. So it's a very interesting point that you make up. Thank you for your words. Just to move on into the next speaker, we've got Shaun Thomas. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Shaun. Not only is Shaun our co-founder, but he has many bows to his arrows, shall we say.
Well, I was the Green Party candidate in the 2019 election for the Rhondda. I'm not sure I've got that many bows to my arrows, but I'll leave the introduction at that, really. So just to say where my interest came from in UBI, it was from talking to Natalie Bennett, the then Green Party leader, when I was a student in Sheffield. It came across to me like a bit of a cure-all to the problems that students were facing at the time. Massive debts, private landlord problems around that, and just being weighed down by debt for the rest of their lives, being put off from studying, etc. So it came across to me as a policy that offered real hope for the future of our young people. So that's where essentially I've come at this from, really. And that's the reason I joined the Green Party as well. So just to follow on from what Mick was saying a bit, the levels of inequality across the UK are quite stark. So I think looking at RCT, particularly in the Rhondda, we're facing a lot of crises at the same time. The flooding, for example, coronavirus, people being stuck in their houses. There's all sorts of problems which are often quite hidden, from which we don't think about very often. There's people living below the breadline and have been virtually all of my life in this area. So I think the UBI is a policy that ensures no one's actually left behind. Everyone's got that stable income just to cover their basic needs. Ensures nobody is nobody is falling into homelessness or precarious living conditions. It also allows people to say no to precarious jobs, spending 2 hours of the day commuting to work, for example, often in jobs that they actually hate. So I think it's time we need to start talking about quality of life, not just getting over the breadline, but start thinking about how we can improve people's quality of life as well. People are not just alive to live into work or working to live, essentially. Yeah, so I think on top of the decades of deprivation, some of which I've had personal experience of, currently in the coronavirus pandemic, my grandmother is running a small business which has been closed in the Rhondda since March now. She doesn't feel like it's safe for her to reopen the business. So there's all sorts of while the funding from the government is welcome, there's all sorts of issues which are not addressed, which could be covered by a policy like the UBI. Yeah, there's also other crises coming down the line. Obviously, we're currently facing a climate emergency, and I think a UBI is essentially a way of us moving away from an over-consumerist culture or culture that's just based on work. Where our basics of life, water, electricity, disposable money are covered, and people are free to live the lives that they actually want to live. So I think it's more about quality of life as well as getting us above the poverty level. Yeah, there's also the question of the moral implications of this. So universal credit, we obviously know it's doing a lot of people a disservice at the moment. So there's people having to jump through hoops essentially to get the money that they need. So I think that's deeply immoral, actually. And I think a universal basic income without any questions, giving that money to everyone, ensures that A, we get rid of the stigma attached to benefits, and B, that everyone is able to function in their daily lives without all of those problems that universal credit is currently putting in place. I'll leave it at that for now, if that's okay.
Thank you, Shaun. That's fantastic. Yeah, just to pick up on one of your points there in terms of people being able to stay in education and people suffering because of it. You know, one of the biggest things we find these days with 18-year-olds wanting to go to university is the actual cost of it. With a UBI, people will be able to go to university and maybe not have to have a part-time job as they're doing it, which means their grades would be better. Therefore, people within Rhondda Cynon are better educated. So I think that's a really, really key point that you brought up there. Obviously, you've lived the experience, Shaun. So, you know, you're the perfect one to talk about it. So thank you very much for that. Next, we have Leanne Woods MS. Leanne, if you'd like to come in, please.
Hello, everyone. And I'd like to, first of all, start by saying thank you to the organisers of the meeting as well. It might be a cliche to say that universal basic income is an idea whose time has come, but it does seem that the momentum is with all of us who see the merit of this as a concept now. The introduction of UBI is a cause that I've championed a number of times since the coronavirus pandemic broke in March, particularly because that global pandemic has disrupted so much and has created a space for a discussion around this now, a space that perhaps didn't exist in the past. I've had lots of communication from people who've fallen through the gaps of the various schemes and support that's been available for small businesses and individuals. And there have been various schemes put forward by Westminster and Cardiff Bay, but there have been a significant number of people who've not been able to have any kind of help at all. And it became apparent fairly early on in the pandemic, before March was over, that this was going to be a problem. And I wrote to the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, putting the case for UBI as an alternative to the furlough scheme for those people who weren't able to claim the furlough scheme. Those calls obviously weren't heeded, but I've no doubt in my mind that had UBI been introduced at the beginning of this pandemic, we wouldn't be in the position that we're currently in, with the high transmission rates and the high rates of poverty that many people have been plunged into as a result of this crisis. It's not all doom and gloom. It's important to say that. I was heartened to read that there are moves to put together a 3-year pilot form of UBI in Ireland. The Irish took a step closer after a government report recommended its adoption just this week. So it's not really a classic universal basic income, what they're introducing in Ireland, but it's a start. It'll be just a payment initially for those working in the culture sector in Ireland. And we all know how the culture sector, in particular musicians and people working in the entertainment industry, have been particularly hit by this pandemic. But it'll be a start if this is adopted in some form there, because then we'll obviously have something to work from. The scheme in Ireland is based on the minimum wage of €10.20 an hour, and would be instead of welfare payments for people working in the creative sector. But crucially, it wouldn't prevent them from earning extra money from jobs as and when they arise. The recommendation of the report is for a 3-year pilot, and I'm sure many other people on this Zoom call will be watching with great interest how things develop with that. Now, UBI is not a particularly left-wing idea. It's important to say that. We know that Richard Nixon, who could hardly be described as left-leaning in anyone's book, came very close to implementing UBI under his presidency until he was spooked by his own advisor, who was dead set against UBI. Now, history may have been very different had this advisor not managed to jettison the UBI plan on the day that it was due to be announced publicly. So why did this hardline right-wing president come within a hair's breadth of introducing UBI? It was because the trials his government conducted were successful, and it made perfect economic sense. Even hard-nosed Republicans had to take notice of that. This interest in UBI from across the political spectrum tells us two things, one positive and one negative. First, the word of caution. Many on the left have dismissed the idea of UBI as a fundamentally right-wing idea advocated by some free marketeers, and they fear that its introduction will be used as an excuse to roll back other universal social programs like state education, the NHS, and the wider benefit system. And that, of course, would lead to an even worse situation for those people who are the worst off. So we've got to be wary of politicians on the right making the argument that everyone receiving an income takes away the need for those services. As with so many other things, the devil is in the detail with UBI. So we can't introduce it without safeguards, such as guaranteeing that the vulnerable are not worse off and that public services are protected as of right. Our goal, I would argue, is to introduce a socialist UBI. Now, on the positive side, one of the right-wing myths they debunked in America was that people would become lazy, they'd sit around doing nothing on free money. But the trial found one mother who had dropped out of high school years previously cut down her working hours to study for a degree in psychology, and she went on to land a much better paid job as a researcher. Another woman took acting classes and her husband began writing music, and she told the researchers working on the trial, "We are now self-sufficient, income-earning artists." Among the New Jersey subjects in the trial, the rate of high school graduations increased by 30%. Now imagine the benefits of people having free time to follow their dreams and their passions, to study, to become better qualified, and how much of a benefit that would have for all of the rest of us here in Wales. We're talking real transformational change for our country if we could do that. I'd like to see people be freed up to take part in some of the ideas and schemes that I put forward almost a decade ago now in a pamphlet that I wrote called A Green Print for the Valleys. The green print contained ideas to tackle problems such as the public sector cuts and high levels of unemployment. And nearly a decade on from the paper's publications, we still have these problems. In my plan, I propose things like a green skills construction college, the implementation of an integrated transport plan for the valleys, providing financial support for home energy efficiency measures, and for the setting up of green cooperatives, as well as creating a land bank for renewable energy and food production, and a programme to renovate heritage buildings. Imagine if people had the free time to work on programs like that, to get involved in cooperatives, get them going, create employment, create apprenticeships and so on, as well as contribute to the remedies we need to manage the climate crisis. So all of these things are still needed, and UBI could provide the catalyst for such schemes. And I'm hopeful that the silver lining under what is awful conditions for so many people at the moment with COVID will be the emergence of a positive and lasting change about the way that we do things. And universal basic income would be high up on the changes that I'd like to see us introduce in Wales to get out of the state that we're currently in. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Leanne. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. It's interesting you talked about the trial in America and the sort of debunking of the laziness, because there was a report published earlier in the year that came from Finland where a trial was carried out, or a pilot was carried out, and it actually found that even though it was only marginal, that employment actually increased. But the key point in that is that it didn't decrease. So it actually debunks the myth that a UBI makes people lazy. It's just not true. So thank you very much for bringing that point up. We then move on to the final speaker, Beth Winter MP. Beth, can I bring you in? Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you, Liam. And I just want to start by saying a huge thank you to Liam, Shaun and Jonathan within Wales for the tireless work that you've been doing on this, because I understand you work full time. Some of you have got young families and you're doing this in your spare time. So I really do take my hat off to you. And also thanks to Sam, Johnny and others nationally for pushing this at a national level, because without you, I don't think we'd be where we are now. So credit to you for really pushing this agenda forward. So as others already said, the COVID pandemic has exposed, the extent of poverty and inequality that exist in society. In Cynon Valley alone, a quarter of people live in poverty. Nearly a third of children live in poverty. And in one ward, Penrhyw Caeber, around 45% of children are living in poverty. This is totally unacceptable in the 5th richest nation in the world. And since the COVID pandemic began, there have been some really interesting reports in Wales which have highlighted the extent of inequality. Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Bevan Foundation have recently published some really startling evidence about the impact the pandemic is having on people here in Wales. So for instance, JRF have showed that low pay, unaffordable housing, lack of childcare have contributed to 700,000 people living in poverty, including nearly 200,000 children. Not acceptable in this day and age. But the pandemic has also exposed inadequacies of our welfare system, which I'm sure you're all very aware of, given the coverage in the press. So statutory sick pay, you know, 95 odd pound a week, totally unacceptable amount of money for people to be expected to live on. 5-week waiting time for universal credit. And I just mentioned the JRF report, which has shown that in Wales, by August of this year, the number of universal credit claimants had doubled since the beginning of 2020. And we all know that we've already entered what is probably going to be the worst recession on history in this country. So we've got to do everything that we can to achieve a fairer, a more resilient society and economy coming out of this pandemic. And there is a different way. And a vital part of this is going to be replacing the dysfunctional benefit system with one that provides financial security for all, and universal basic income, which is an unconditional and regular cash payment to everybody, regardless of our income or situation. That is gaining significant traction as a solution to many of these issues. Now, it's underpinned by a principle which I support, which is universality. So everybody should have enough to cover their basic costs of living and financial security. We know the UBI has got a number of merits. So one of its merits is that it meets the human rights that everybody should have an appropriate amount of money on which to subsist. It can overcome the stigma and means testing associated with the existing welfare system. It's simple, unlike the complex current welfare system, and it can also stimulate demand in the economy by putting people's money in people's pockets, and so could actually help us avoid a prolonged and deep recession. There's been a number of pieces of research and opinion polls during the pandemic, one of which showed that 84% of people support the introduction of UBI. And recently there was a parliamentary petition submitted to Parliament with approximately 114,000 signatures. And I spoke at the Petitions Committee following the submission of the petition. And there's definitely an appetite at the national level to be exploring this. And where there have been pilots of the scheme, there are clear benefits in terms of people's health, well-being, and financial situation. Now, there are obviously significant cost implications to introducing UBI, but surely these can be recouped through additional tax revenues as the economy grows. We could call for a people's quantitative easing, with the Bank of England putting money into the economy to help pay for it, as they've done following the 2008 recession. The government can borrow more money, or we could simply tax the rich much more. And we could also close some of the over 1,000 tax reliefs in the UK, many of which disproportionately benefit the wealthiest people. So we do have the money to do this. That's my fundamental point here. UBI would require modification to ensure that those with the greatest need retain additional benefits. I think, as Mick just mentioned earlier, it is not a panacea to all our problems. It needs to gain public acceptance of some of the changes in taxation, and it cannot, for me, be looked at in isolation from other changes that can take place to the welfare benefits system alongside this. And I would, for example, urge Welsh Government to work with others to explore ways to implement some of the recommendations in the JRF and the Bevan Foundation report, which have been published recently, to establish a clear, effective and fair Welsh benefits system which can complement the social security system that exists in the UK. I'm really pleased the UBI is gaining an increasing amount of support at a UK level. I'm one of the co-chairs, and I'm really pleased and feel privileged to be in this position of the recently established cross-party parliamentary and local government working group on UBI. And it really is an innovative group and structure consisting of not only cross-party MPs, but also local authority councillors, mayors, peers, and local government officers. It's quite unique in the way that it's been set up and is extremely inclusive. And the aim of this group is to influence the wider debate on UBI and social security in the UK. And we've recently sent a letter to Rishi Sunak asking the UK government to support the piloting of UBI. And the letter attracted over 500 signatures of elected representatives, and I understand thousands of people have since signed their names to the content of the letter, which is really encouraging. We're yet to get a response from Rishi, but we will be pushing and are currently pushing for that response, and we'll ensure that we do get a response at some point. Within the UK Labour Party, of which I'm a member, there is a Labour for UBI group, which was launched at the Labour Party conference this year, which is again a platform that is gaining support within the Labour Party for UBI. And while unfortunately the Labour Party has not publicly endorsed UBI, it hasn't rejected the notion yet, and I'm pursuing conversations with the Shadow Treasury team on this subject, and Annalise Dodds is open to those discussions. And Keir Starmer's comments on Andrew Marr recently, I've got to be seen as encouraging. He's not rejected UBI, so I and others will be pushing for this within the party as well. And here in Wales, as others have mentioned, there are an increasing amount of organisations and politicians expressing their support for UBI. I've had several conversations with the Future Generations Commissioner Sophie Howe, who's come out publicly in support of UBI, and it's linked, and I agree, to other campaigns such as a 4-day working week. And she really does see it as a solution to helping people out of poverty and aiding the economy. And as others have mentioned, I'm find it very welcoming that First Minister Mark Drakeford sees a place for UBI and is willing to play a part in such an experiment here in Wales. And it is great news that the backbench Senedd motion gained overwhelming support among MSs in the Senedd last month. So Welsh Government does appear open to explore this further, but obviously it needs the money to do so, which is why the role of UK Government is instrumental and is required. So we really do need a benefits system that ensures everyone has equal access to financial safety nets that is adequate for their needs, along with a progressive taxation system that helps to pay for it. And I am always encouraged by our communities in the valleys, because we really do have a passion for change and equality, and just seeing so many of you, some of the faces I see are very familiar to me, who are willing to sign up to this initiative. We've got a strong tradition, not only in the valleys, but in Wales, for fighting for change. And I know that this is going to gain increased traction. And I am going to take this opportunity just to plug the fact that in Cynon Valley, we've set up 3 advisory groups, one of which, I've set them up and want it to be an inclusive process, one of which is looking at the economy, but one is looking at welfare reform. And we've already started having discussions within the Valley at how we could promote and pilot UBI. And 2 local people, Julia Salazin and Sandra Holiday, have put themselves forward to help push this in the Cynon Valley. So we are taking our bottom-up approach, and we will achieve this. Together we can really make a difference. So diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you ever so much for this opportunity this evening. And I so look forward to working with you all on this extremely important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and also thank you for your kind words at the beginning of that. Obviously, we've lent on quite a lot of political people throughout our journey through this. You know, we're not, like you said, we're not employed in politics. We do rely on people like yourself, Leanne, Shaun, and Mick, to give us that guidance at times. And it's been an absolute pleasure working with you through it as well. So again, thank you for your kind words. So that kind of brings it to an end in terms of speakers, but it does open the floor up for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, I think if you're watching on Facebook or any of the socials, you might be able to put them in a comment, and then one of the network guys will then put it into our chat so I can read it out. Or if you're in the actual Zoom call itself, you can pop it into the chat, and I'll kind of read it out for you. But I've got one first question here that I picked out earlier, if you bear with me. So, to what extent have you considered automation, loss of jobs to machines in the future? So that question is to all of the panel, but would anyone like to jump and answer that question first? Yeah, Mick?
Automation, artificial intelligence, all these are issues that are going to impact on work. You know, part of these things are very similar to a debate we had in the late 70s, which was with you know, development of robots in industry and so on. You know, there's not going to be enough work to go around, and the response within the debate was that the fact of the matter is, within society, we want to share the work. We want people to have to work less. We want a reduced working week. We want people to enjoy life and take the benefits of things like automation, things like artificial intelligence, and so on. But what they highlight is very much this, that as we're going to have, and we are going to have, massive change, technological change within our society over the coming decades, what is the role of society? Society has got to ensure, if it wants stability, if it wants cohesion, and it wants people to have, you know, a genuine quality of life and opportunity, there has to be a basic means of people living. Everyone in society should have the right to the very basics, whether it be education, it be health, it be housing, the right to a social life and enjoyment. You cannot do that unless you have a basic income, a basic standard of living. What it actually, the real challenge that comes out of the question is this: it is about the redistribution of wealth. It is about the fair sharing of wealth within society and about commitment to equality. So that is why, you know, the question actually goes right to the core of why we are actually discussing UBI at this very moment, because unless we do something that makes change, we are going to create a massive, an even greater underclass of poverty than we have at the moment.
Thank you very much for that, Mick. We've had another question coming from the social media element, so it's a big one. How do we get the Tories on board? So who would like to tackle that one?
At a national level, if that's okay, I mean, at the start of the pandemic, we had close to 200 MPs, including many Tories, sign a letter in support of a recovery UBI. And if you look at what Tories have done in terms of the furlough scheme, which I think most of us would never have expected the Tories to introduce, I think there is scope to push the Tories, and this UBI, and this is why the cross-party group that I'm involved with this is such a good example. It's a cross-party initiative, and I think there is scope to move different parties in support of this, because it actually stimulates demand in the economy. There's so many benefits to UBI. It should be regarded as beneficial to everybody. So I'm quite optimistic about the opportunities to shift people, whatever their political persuasion, onto agreeing to the principle of UBI.
Thank you, Beth. Leanne, look to come in on that question.
Yeah, I mean, just, you know, working on the basis that Tories are generally pretty cynical and want to save money, then if we could pitch a UBI pilot like they have in Ireland and focused it on the cultural sector, musicians, entertainers, people working in venues and so on, then it could actually let them off the hook because they're not supporting those people now. I know of many people in that sector who've taken jobs, you know, driving vans for Tesco's and things like that, just to be able to make ends meet. We're not going to have any musicians left at the end of this pandemic if things carry on. At the moment, the Tories are not funding them. So if we could have a UBI pilot focusing on that specific sector initially, then perhaps the Tories could be persuaded on the basis that it could save them a bob or two. And, you know, you've got to try everything, haven't you?
Absolutely. Mick, do you want to come in on that one, or are we okay to move on?
I'll come in one point on it because today, during the meeting of the Language, Culture and Media Committee, one of the things we were actually discussing with musicians was the need for sectoral support for musicians, etc., for the very reasons that Leanne has outlined. So the idea is there. I think my only concern, of course, is what it will do is show how providing a basic income can actually resolve some of the problems coming from COVID and basic poverty within that industry. I think we mustn't lose sight, though, of the need for a far broader structural change. But we are talking about pilots. You know, we are talking about trials and winning the hearts and minds. So I think that's a really interesting idea, but one that was already being discussed, and I suspect is going to appear in the report that's going to be produced about the impact of COVID on live music and so on. So you know, it's a very interesting area.
Yeah, absolutely, Mick. Right. I think this particular question is aimed at one person on the panel. So is a call for a pilot going to be included in the Plaid manifesto?
I don't know, I'm not the leader of Plaid Cymru anymore, so I don't get to decide such things like I used to. That's a really good question, and time is running tight on the manifesto now. A lot of work has already gone into how much has been developed. But given that Plaid Cymru has said quite clearly through the course of this pandemic that UBI is a solution, then I'd be surprised for there not to be a mention of it in there, to be honest with you. But I haven't seen the drafts as things stand, so please don't hold my word as a tablet of stone on this.
I'm sure nobody will hold you to it, Leanne. Okay, so our next one again has come from our socials. Do you think the current pandemic has led to a reduction in the stigma surrounding claiming benefits? And can this be built on with the UBI campaign? Would anybody like to come in on that first? Yeah, Mick?
I don't know. Listen, I think the answer is it is. You've got people who up until now would have actually frowned, and they'd have given dark looks at people who are on benefits. And we've seen all the stuff on the media, you know, welfare scroungers. You now have people who actually realise. I think we have a new evaluation, not only of the public sector, but also that the role of public sector and the welfare system actually plays and how essential it actually is. So I think it has taken that leap. The danger is, though, I'm not convinced that we've actually won hearts and minds yet. But I think it is a little stepping stone that's there that you say to people, well, when you needed it, it was there for you. You may never have expected it in your life. It may not have been adequate and so on. But just think, if we could actually develop this properly, so a way that it could actually eliminate poverty as well, I think there is an opening there to hearts and minds of people.
I think I'd agree with that. And what it has clearly done, I think, as I mentioned when I spoke, it really has exposed the inadequacies of the current welfare system. I mean, how many people would have realised the level of statutory sick pay before this pandemic? I mean, it's totally unacceptable, the amount of the rates of benefits. And there's a big push, you know, for the sustaining of the £20 uplift in universal credit and other benefits from April of next year. But even that isn't enough. And I do agree with Mick that as much as maybe the stigma has been challenged in certain respects, we've got to be able to sustain that moving forward, and that is a concern of mine, that won't continue, which is why UBI as an alternative has got to be pushed, really, because it is a basic amount of income for everybody, regardless of your financial situation.
Can I say something on this? Perhaps slightly deviating from what the others have just said. I think welfare is actually a big divider, and the stigma attached to people claiming benefits is still there. It might have reduced a little bit because more people have had to find themselves having to claim things, but you know, there's still an attitude, if you've got to claim benefits, you're pretty much low at the lowest ebb of society. And, you know, if we talk about stigma, I remember when I was in school, we used to have separate dinner queues for those of us who were having free school meals, right? You had a little pink ticket and you had to show that. And it was all really embarrassing because you were separated out and people thought of you as different. Now, the good thing about UBI is that everybody gets the same. So they've got rid of the stigma with free school meals by giving everybody a fingerprint to access their free school meals. You can't differentiate between who's paying and who's not paying. And it's the same with UBI. The best way to tackle stigma is to treat everybody with dignity and with equality. And that's the best way to tackle stigma. So I think UBI has got a brilliant opportunity to really kick stigma into touch, really, when it comes to claiming benefits.
Thank you, Leanne.
Just to say as well, sorry, it's not only the stigma, but it's the actual inhumane procedures within the universal credit system. My friend who's an archaeologist hasn't been able to take any work during the pandemic, but she has to continuously go for meetings, proving that she's applying for jobs that she doesn't care about just to get the means that she needs to live. So it's the stigma and the inhumane systems are still in place as far as I'm concerned.
Can I just make one point that follows on from that? Because that's I mean, there's a really good point there. And do you just think of the amount of waste of resources and time that plagues in these thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of applications for jobs that people know they're not going to get, but they're required to do, the bureaucracy on the business, the bureaucracy on individuals, purely because it's satisfying a sort of concept of the deserving poor, that if you're going to have this, you've got to show, etc., rather than the realistic grasp of employment. And one thing I think that goes with UBI very clearly has got to be a commitment to full employment as well. Now, this is in the broader, I think, the broader parameters of the thinking process around UBI and so on. But there's got to be, a commitment to that as part of the whole process in the longer term, as well as a commitment to redistribution and equality.
Thanks, Mick. I think we've got a hand up actually in the call. I think, Pauline, have you got your hand up there that you wanted to ask a question?
Sorry about that. Well, I want to return back. I'm not opposed to the pilot being sector-led, but I'm more interested in catering for communities that have known long-term poverty. Beth mentioned Penrhyn Ward in Cynon Valley. Now, historically, I was born and brought up in the Penrhyn Ward, so I know what it is like to be poor. And I won't tell you my age, but I got a good many decades above most people in this room, so I can speak from personal experience. And yet, Penrhyn has the highest level of child poverty, whichever government has been in control from the war to today, and it hasn't budged an inch in becoming number 500 and odd instead of number 3. In the poverty stake. So my instinct is telling me, and let's not kid ourselves, I know pandemic has caused a lot of benefit claimants, because I know the number of free school meals in the county of Rhondda and Taff have gone through the roof. I know the number of people claiming council tax relief has gone through the roof. So there are a lot more people claiming benefit as a consequence of COVID than they were in February. But I'm talking about a community that has been in that trap since 1945. And I think that if there is to be a pilot, it is places like Penrhyw should be amongst our thoughts to lift that community. They are the salt of the earth. You know, they've got a voluntary team to keep their swimming pool open, and now they'll have some Christmas festivities so far as the regulations will allow. That is a community that is in crisis, but it's got spirit and it's got aspiration. And I think it is a community like that deserves to be a pilot. And I think the concerns about public attitude will dissipate because everybody should know the Penrhyw story. And if they don't, I hope they learn it.
Thank you, Pauline. Would any of the panel like to comment on anything Pauline said in there? I think we're all in agreement of the type of communities that will benefit from a universal basic income. But Leanne, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with what Pauline has said in terms of when the pilot is selected, that the need and poverty levels are considered at the top of the agenda. There's so much to consider here. What I'd like us to focus on is what we can do practically to take this on to the next stage. There've been some good points made tonight. We all, I think, would probably agree that there's a need for this and that we can make the case for this, and that, as Pauline has just said, the public support will come when it's rolled out. I'm pretty sure about that as well. But what steps can we practically take now? I mean, is there something the councillors here could do in terms of taking a motion forward for the council? What is it that grassroots activists can do in terms of sharing information with people that they work with on a voluntary capacity in communities now? Ideas for action would be welcome. Thank you.
Can I just come in and just support everything that Pauline has said, because I've spent quite a bit of time in the last year down in Penrhyw, and in terms of community spirit, you cannot find a community with more community spirit and determination than Penrhyw. And I think, like all of us mentioned when we spoke, UBI shouldn't be looked at in isolation from other issues, because there are a complex array of issues taking place within communities like Penrhyw. Housing jumps out to me hugely in terms of the impact that has on well-being and poverty. And lots of the research on UBI, and I agree with this, and this is with people like the Bevan Foundation come from, you know, some of the most vulnerable groups, there are concerns, could be worse off with UBI. So on top of UBI, things like housing costs still need to be added on to. And this is where the pilots are important, really, to see how UBI needs to complement other benefits and other forms of support. And I know that already the Child Poverty Action Group are doing some work in places like Penrhyw. And I think when we look at the pilots, for me, and again, this is discussion that needs to take place, I think it'd be important to pilot the scheme in different types of communities to see how it can be operationalised in communities with high levels of deprivation, but I think also in communities maybe with different levels of deprivation, to see what the impact can be. But I just want to agree and thank Pauline for her words there. Thank you.
Yeah, Mick, yeah.
If I just had a couple on that, I mean, I remember Penrhyw well when the pit was there, and I was doing work with the NUM and etc. And to some extent, that employment at the time actually masked the poverty that existed in a lot of communities, because you had a lot of people that were actually in work and that they had an income. And of course, the pit went, it actually made it even more blatant and expanded it as well. So, I mean, Pauline's absolutely right on that. And Beth is absolutely right in terms of the issues of the quality of housing, particularly a lot of the old terraced housing that was built particularly for the colliery. But I think the point that's been made about something like Penrhyw, you know, if you're going to have a trial, it's got to show that it makes an impact. Because that's the only way people will ultimately, in the long term, buy into something to show that it can actually tackle poverty. And if the whole purpose to this is about trying to eliminate poverty, then why don't you start? You know, that any trial should start with the actual poorest areas that you actually have. The one challenge I do have on this as well is, and Leanne says, well, what can we do practically? One, it's very important that we're talking about it. Secondly, it's very important that councils are talking about it, passing motions, and that there are debates in various organisations, in the political parties and so on. What is really important, though, I think, is to start actually looking at the mechanics as to how you might apply a model, what the model might look like, because some of the models I've actually seen suggested I don't think would actually be much better than the sort of system that we have at the moment. I think we've got to do something that actually does transform that base poverty level, and working that out and calculating it and how that model might work and interact with the existing system is going to be absolutely fundamental. And you know, I really hope this is work maybe Roundtree and Bevan Foundation and perhaps even Welsh Government and so on will do in conjunction with local councils.
Fabulous, thank you, Mick. There are a couple of questions left. I know time is going on, so try and squeeze at least 2 or 3 more in, and then if we have no more or no pressing issues, then I guess we can close up then. So one of the last ones we have here is, do you think devolution of the welfare system is integral for the introduction of UBI Wales? Anyone like to take that and answer that?
I come in first.
Yeah,
I
Shaun.
do think that's integral, actually. I can't see realistically in the short term that the UK government will implement this, but I'm not entirely sure. I may be a bit more hopeful depending on the day, but I think personally independence is the way that we can ensure that we maintain these benefits once we've implemented a UBI, and that it won't be taken away by any rollback on devolution. We've seen how against the devolution settlement this current Tory government is. So I think that's personally the way that I would go for it. In the meantime, devolution of that is absolutely integral to it.
Thank you, Shaun. Mick, yeah.
Well, only this. I think there's a really complex but important political argument about how the benefit system works, the extent to which it can be devolved. There's no point devolving benefits if you end up, as we've had within Wales, less than what the cost of those benefits. And I think it also ties in and integrates with the whole concept of the redistribution of wealth around the UK, how that works, what the implications are. So I don't rule it out as a discussion. I just think it's an incredibly complex one. I think one, perhaps to push to one side rather than detracting from the focus on the UBI and establishing trials, because it seems to me those are the most important immediate steps and opportunities that we might actually have.
Yeah, agree.
Can I just say I agree with what Shaun has said. You know, if we don't like the way that the benefit system is run now, then the best thing to do about that is to devise a system that we do like and run it ourselves, isn't it? And that's what this gives us the opportunity to do. I mean, Plaid Cymru would advocate more control over welfare benefits under the Senedd now, but if we move in towards universal income for everyone, then it makes sense for that welfare budget and the principles that control welfare to be integrated in with UBI, because coming back to the problems that we identified earlier on about a right-wing or a neoliberal UBI, then that could see the benefit system withdrawn completely, and I'd like to think we'd all be opposed to that for all the obvious reasons.
I wouldn't say never, but at this point in time, I think we've got to be realistic and focus on what's achievable. And the cross-party group that I'm part of is pushing Rishi and the UK government to pilot UBI in the 4 nations of the UK, and I think that in itself is going to be, or is an uphill struggle. It's achievable, but at this stage, I think that is where we're at. I think as well, we can't. It is complex as well. You know, it's not just a matter of devolving welfare. You've got the whole issue of the unfairness of the Barnett formula and the devolution settlement at the moment. It's population or needs based. It is extremely complex. So I'm not saying never, but I think at this point in time, like I said at the outset, we've got to focus on things which I think are achievable. Can I just add as well, I mentioned it when I spoke about the Bevan Foundation report, and they've come up with some really good recommendations about the Welsh Government further developing a Welsh benefit system alongside the UK Government. So I think that is definitely something that needs to be explored further at a Welsh level at this point in time.
Fantastic. Final question then, and this is more of a question from the Lab Network as a whole for all our panelists really. Do you think UBI could be our generation's NHS? That's for all the panel, so don't all jump in at once.
Yes, it could. I'll just leave it at that. It could. You know, it has the opportunity to be transformational if we get it at the right level and if we do it in a socialist way. It also has the potential to take things in a different direction, as has already been argued. But yes, it has the potential to transform employment situations for people, general well-being in a similar way to the way that the NHS did. And wouldn't it be great if people are looking back in 50 and 75 years' time, congratulating the founders of UBI in the same way as Aneurin Bevan is remembered today?
I just say I agree with that. I'll give another example of it. When we had a legal aid system that entitled people to have access to justice, when it was set up in 1947, it was described as the NHS of the legal system, that is, empowering people to have their rights. And if we really believe, and as a socialist, the fundamental principle is the elimination of poverty, then surely any idea that enables us to start talking about how we might do that has got to be something that is well worth our discussing and putting our imaginations to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think no one's mentioned it yet, but also the impact on mental health and the current mental health crisis that we're going through from the number of other crises, COVID, climate crisis, everything. I think this has opportunity to transform people's emotional stability as well in terms of financial anxieties that they're currently facing. So absolutely.
I think we're all in agreement, so the answer would be yes. But it's got to be looked at alongside other transformational changes, a progressive tax system, redistribution of wealth, full employment, as others have mentioned. This could be part of a package of proposals to transform society into the socialist society that we all want. And we can have an instrumental role in that here in Rhondda Cynon-Taf. Like I said, we have a history and a tradition of fighting causes, taking action. So let's grab that now, moving on from tonight in a positive way, get the local authority to pass motions, join my advisory group on welfare reform if you're not part of it now, get other advisory groups in the other adjoining areas and take action, because we can do this. So yeah, here's to working with you all on this. Looking forward to it. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess that kind of concludes our event. A couple more little plugs that I will do. If you'd like to follow updates from the UBI Lab itself, we have a Twitter page at UBI Lab RCT. and also UBI Lab Wales are on Twitter. They're always really busy, so you know your phone and notifications will be going off quite a lot a day. So just make the notifications if you want, or don't actually, because you'll know everything. We also have a mailing list. I think there's been a link put in the chat about the mailing list as well. I think Johnny's doing that for us. So if you want to join that mailing list, you can do. I'd like to thank our fantastic speakers tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant and a privilege to have you with us on the event. I never thought that, you know, I'd be leading an event like this within RCT, but we are here now, and it's absolutely fantastic. And like I said, from my point of view, being a resident and working here, I think UBI could absolutely transform the fortunes of RCT. So we're all working in the same direction. Hopefully we'll come up with some sort of positive goal with the UBI in future. Now, in terms of the motion, we have sent letters to all our councillors. So our councillors that are on the meeting tonight, you've heard from us already. So if you'd like to respond to us, that would be absolutely fantastic. But again, thank you very, very much for your Thursday evening. I wish you a good evening, and keep an eye on our socials for any updates. Take care. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
And just a quick well done and thank you to Liam for doing such a brilliant job chairing tonight. Well done, mate.